if there were a right and wrong, how would the world be different?
If there were? If there were a right and wrong. You know, my question is, how would we all agree anyway? And he used to walk around in this Darth Vader costume, and he would just walk around with a lightsaber. And I don't know what he did, but I would see him like from my window. He'd walk into town, and then he'd come back up, and he'd be playing music sometimes. And then one day he was in a bear costume in a coffee shop.
Oh, maybe he. Do you know
saw
what?
the bear
just walked out with the sword earlier today. I've seen the bear guy.
Yeah.
You did?
Was that
Yeah.
the same
Okay,
person?
that's
Yeah.
the same person.
Okay,
but I don't know
like
his
a
name. I can't remember his name. My neighbors know.
It's cool if we record?
Yes.
Cool.
I was just gonna puzzle these things.
Yeah, you get to take one of those if you want. I think there's a yellow one in here. So the idea is with each conversation you have with one of us, you earn another piece,
I
and then
see.
they all fit together and you can build out the whole set.
Collect the whole set.
Collect the whole set.
Love it.
Well, thanks for coming down.
Absolutely.
Sam, right?
Sam.
S-A-M?
S-A-M.
Cool. I'm David.
Some people pronounce it Sam.
Sam.
I'm kidding.
Sam.
Yeah. David.
Yeah, great to meet you.
Yeah. Good meeting.
And you wanted to talk about good and evil? Like, that there is no good and
Ooh.
there is no good and evil?
Or right and wrong.
Okay.
Or like if an event happens in your life, is it good? Is it bad? How do you frame it?
Uh-huh.
Wrong or right? Yeah.
So what would be your claim?
My thought is on the plane that we live on currently, where you open your eyes and light rays are bouncing off things and coming back in your eye, and then your brain is interpreting it, there is a sort of right and wrong. So it's kind of like, it's almost like physics on this plane.
Okay.
Okay? But I think it's an illusion. No, I'm curious that it might be an illusion. I'll put it that way.
You suspect it's an illusion?
I have a suspicion.
Okay.
Yeah. So we absolutely experience suffering, sadness, anger. And so what I'm saying is, I don't think people should take what I'm saying and change how they feel about their life. However, let's say you're watching TV and they're talking about outer space and they're like, hey, we sent this telescope, look at this galaxy, look at this, thing. If two galaxies collide, is that right or wrong?
Okay.
Is that good or bad?
Gotcha. It sounds like, I think the word might be amoral, where it's not moral or immoral. Moral, it's useless to explore because it can't be one or the other. It just is, kind of.
Yeah, I would say it just is. And there's so much we don't know. But I would say, just from our perspective, when you look at things that are really, really, really big outside of the story of our lives, and you look at things that are really, really, really small, I'm not a physicist, but when you start going below the atom and you get to wavelengths and frequencies, and again, how can you say what's happening at that level? How can you label it as anything but this is what is, and this is just the way the existence is?
Yeah, and not attaching right or wrong to it.
Yeah, especially right or wrong. Yeah.
All right, so you suspect that right and wrong is an illusion. Do you suspect this plane is an illusion?
Yes and no. So I think of it like levels. And because I have a human brain, I'll just think of it as sizes, like really small, we're in some middle level, and then there's some greater level that would be zooming out to the solar system and the galaxies, and we don't even know what the universe is, really. I grew up with Big Bang Theory, but they're like, yeah, we don't actually think that's how it happened, as they look at it.
How many planes are there, do you think?
It's a good question, but I don't even know if that's the best way to think about it. And one way I've thought about it is there's essentially one thing. And if you think about like a wavelength can have a certain frequency or amplitude, it's one long wavelength with just changes in the frequency and amplitude.
Okay.
And then I don't even know what we are. Good luck with that. But there's some sort of way that we're observing ourselves. We're observing ourselves. Like I think when I'm looking at you, I'm looking at a part of me.
Okay.
Even if it's a rock, David.
Like interconnection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that only on this plane?
Let me frame it this way. We get obsessed with what's in front of us, what we think is in front of us. So at this moment, who's like listening to this? If you're in America, let's say you're in America listening to this, or anywhere, pick like another country, somewhere else in the world. And there's somebody sitting and they're picking a flower, okay? Are you upset by that person picking that flower? I don't know. Maybe you are. Maybe you're like, you should never pick flowers. I don't know. But most of what's going on is completely out of your awareness. Do you have a strong opinion about it?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
What makes someone focus on, let's say they have, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying anything's wrong, but like, it's interesting. What makes someone focus on, the purpose of my life is I'm a healthcare provider. So let's say I have a mission to improve something in the healthcare space. Great mission. I'm going for it. But why that and why not child abuse? Why not, any other issue on the planet? What makes us pick something? It's something that we're familiar with. Maybe something happened to us. It's right in front of us. But there are millions, billions, trillions of things happening every second that we have no awareness of and we're not obsessed with. So I'm saying this out of humbleness, but we just have such a narrow kind of, and that's fine. I think that's the way I don't even want to say design, but that's the way we are, and that's fine. But I do think zooming out and just seeing that might create a little bit less animosity between groups of people that are very different. Why we assume there's an enemy at all is the reason why we have an enemy. We've created enemy. We've created the idea of enemy.
That kind of goes along with you suspect there is no right and wrong.
How do you mobilize people? Especially if you want to manipulate them. You got to have an enemy. You got to have something they're afraid of, or make them really upset, which usually still is fear involved. And you got to have an enemy. So a good question to ask is, where are you creating enemies in your mind where there are actually no enemies? Yeah. It's not, I really don't know if there's a right and wrong at the level of galaxies and, big creation or small creation. But it makes me wonder, I guess, why we create so many enemies. Okay, there's this, I think it's a Chinese proverb, and I'll try to tell it quickly. And I'll probably tell it a little wrong. But the premise is, there's this guy, and he has this son. Have you heard this one?
Yeah.
And they're like farmers or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the kid, breaks his leg. And his neighbors come over and it's like, oh, what bad luck you had. Your child broke his leg. And then another day, soldiers come by, and they would normally recruit his son to go to war, but he has a broken leg, so they leave him. And then the neighbors come and they're like, oh, what great luck you have. Your son wasn't sent to war. And then this also happens with horses. So they have a horse that runs away. The neighbors are like, well, that's bad news. And then a few days later, the horse comes back with a bunch of other horses. So now they have all these horses that they can work with. And they're like, that's great.
Which the son had to tame, and that's how he broke his leg.
Yeah. And so, well, And so every time they do that, the farmer guy, he's like, we'll see.
Yeah.
They're like, that's good, that's bad. He's like, we'll find out.
Yeah.
You know? And just having that open mind. I mean, when you label something, you've made your decision, you know? And it's how much are we trapped in those paradigms? And we're causing, I am not the first person to say this. Obviously, there's a proverb about it. But yeah, so I find that is helpful because it's easy to get very upset about things you see in the news or things you see just day to day.
And so when you say planes, and tell me if I'm getting this right or wrong, but like the level at which we see what's going on can determine, like it's kind of a magnification, like how close in are we, and that kind of creates enemies.
Yeah, a perception.
Yeah,
because we're
and
so
if you
close.
zoom out, you don't really notice the enemies, especially if you need the enemies for the bigger, say, for the bigger function of.
Something that we don't understand.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
like bacteria can be seen as like your body's enemy, but you also need it. So it's like depending on your level of magnification, if you're out far enough, then you can appreciate the bacteria because it helps the bigger.
It's really part of your body and part of like
Yeah, the bigger body
being healthy.
and it's the function of it requires the enemy.
Yeah.
But if you were like a blood cell or whatever fights bacteria, you probably know more than I do. But
You're doing a great job. I don't know that I know more
like-
than you.
the thing that fights the bacteria would think that bacteria is an enemy. Where it's if you zoom out, it's not necessarily that clear of an enemy. Is that kind of what you mean by planes? The zooming in and out?
I think that's a great way to explain it. The zooming in and out.
Okay.
I mean, even something we try to make things objective, right? But like if there was an accident that occurred on the street, and I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, folks are sitting over there, maybe eating ice cream. Like people would see different things; they'd have a different description of what happened, and that's like a fairly objective thing, especially if it just happened. By the way, don't do a crime in front of me because I will not be able to identify the person that did it. I'm just not the most observant person in that way, and other people are, But yeah, there's a perception, you're labeling something good and bad from your perspective, and I'm not making that wrong, but we have to realize that our perspective inherently is narrow. It just is, Most people, their beliefs initially stem from like whatever they learned when they're a kid. Whatever, or however they processed things that happened to them. And, it's really, I don't mean to use this in a negative way, but let's say someone is, I'll just use it because it's a charged word, brainwashed with a certain idea. And all I mean is like, that's what they know. That's just what they know. It's the first thing they heard. That's how they learned it. It is so hard to unbrainwash an idea, even if it's hurting you. I mean, you could have this idea about something and it's like literally killing you. And how hard is it to rewire that? Versus you can teach anybody anything when they're little. You can teach them anything. You could take,
Languages are a lot easier. That
Yeah.
kind of thing,
I mean, you could take, there's probably no idea on planet Earth that everyone would say, okay, that's not true. But if you could find one thing that everyone's like, yeah, that's definitely not true, you could raise a child to believe it.
Yeah.
So we just have those narrow perspectives is what I'm getting at.
Have you always felt this way about there probably not being a right or wrong?
I've always felt really dumb, so yes. No. I mean, all of us have had things happen or seen things. It's just your entire life, and you're like, that's not right. I say that every day. I'm like,
Okay.
that's not right. I have a sense of obligation to not suffer and also reduce suffering. I don't like to see suffering. So, but in terms of questioning things, yeah. I mean, growing up, you're gonna see, if you're paying any attention, you're gonna see things that don't match, So, and as an example, like I grew up in Christian culture, which there were some good things about it, and there were things that didn't match, maybe at the church I went to or that kind of thing. And so I'm not mad about it. People aren't, whatever perfect is, whatever rule structures we create, people are gonna, whatever, go outside those lines. So I'm not mad about it. Like, oh, that person's a hypocrite. No, I mean, listen, that's just human. That's human. But you have to, I think when I was a kid, I still had this very strong sense of right and wrong. You know, wanted to please my parents. So they would say, for example, you always say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. I grew up in the South, and that's the right thing to do. And so I understand that, like having good manners, or, you know, come up with your own example. But at the same time, because I held myself to such a high standard of right and wrong, I'm judging everyone else by my standard. Is that helpful? You know, if someone grew up in a completely different household, their parents weren't even around, and I'm like, oh, that person is so rude, they didn't say yes, ma'am, or you know, something silly like that. But like, they don't know. Is it helpful for me to judge them at that point? You know, so what judgments are we making on ourselves and other people that are just like
you're
not
labeling
helpful?
your own standard of right and wrong on other people, maybe unnecessarily.
For sure.
So do you think that it's a couple more questions?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm shivering.
Oh, I just didn't want you to be too uncomfortable. If I'll just ask this: if there were a right and wrong, how would the world be different?
If there were? If there were a right and wrong. You know, my question is, how would we all agree anyway on what is right and wrong if there was a right and wrong in that way? I mean, I certainly try to follow a code of ethics, and sometimes the easiest thing is to put myself in someone else's shoes and say, like, how would I want to be treated in that moment with that thing? And I honestly think the best we can do, so there's one message I kind of grew up with, and I don't just want to blame Christian culture, because I don't know how many other areas this belief comes from, and I don't think every Christian believes this. But there's this idea that you're like evil, you're a sinner, and then you have to be saved. I kind of don't necessarily think that's a super helpful way to think of yourself, because that means you actually can't trust yourself. If you can't trust yourself, how do you know you're even picking the right deity to worship?
Yeah.
I mean, if you suck, it's like you're born and they're like, hey, by the way, you suck. And you're like, that checks out. Because I'm not perfect, and I embarrassed myself in front of somebody, and I didn't make a good grade, so that checks out. I'm a piece of crap. But there's a lot of people walking around with that default. Okay, that's a separate topic, but
Okay. So
I don't think that's
the way that the world would be different if there were a right and wrong, that would require everyone agree to what is right and wrong.
I
So
think
that's
it could
one way.
get really ugly really fast. Legit.
Why?
I could just see that whole idea. That's what we've tried to do, isn't it? Like, give people
That's the world we have.
a list of rules
That's the world we have
that people
in which
that people really can't follow. And then you have to ask, people get distracted by behavior, and I get it. Like, look, if someone was like hurting someone else in the immediate moment, I would recommend stopping that person from attacking, right? So I'm not saying don't have police. I'm not saying don't have, even the military. I'm in the military. But we get so hyper-focused on the behavior, and who's asking why? And I mean, we've all heard the term hurt people, but why is that person doing that? Here's what I can't solve. I think most people are truly, if not everybody, let's just like break it. Everyone on some level is perfectly fine the way they are. Why? Because they are what they are. I didn't, to my knowledge, create myself. I just showed up here one day and everything's here.
humans doing human stuff.
Yes. I mean, if you could go back and create yourself and you created an a-hole, then yeah, okay, it's your fault. But you didn't create yourself.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to say you don't have any control. I don't want to give people leeway to be a-holes.
Yeah.
Your goal in life is to not be an a-hole. I think that's a good start.
Yeah, I like that.
To yourself, either.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And to others.
globally.
Besides, the people that are really jerks to themselves, it comes out on other people anyway, you know? So, they may pretend they love themselves and they're awesome, but really on the inside, they're struggling. You don't treat people disrespectfully or with anger. It's the emotion. You can see it. So again, we focus on the behavior, but like you can see and feel people's energy, where they're coming from. And sometimes they're scared, but they're in anger mode, in fight mode, but you can actually see that they're scared if you're paying attention. And then maybe you're not fighting them back, but you're trying to figure out what they're afraid of and trying to help them.
Kind of have that emotional intelligence, as it were.
Yeah. And then also, people are not always born with as much emotional intelligence, so you got to give them slack too. Like, that's what I mean. How could we make it wrong? Like, we didn't get to choose.
How would your behavior change if you found out that there was a right and wrong?
I would just be totally cool, and I'd be like, hey, okay, good to know. I don't know. I mean, actually, honestly, like, it would look like the behavior of a child.
If you were convinced there was a right and wrong?
Like, let's say there is a perfect right and wrong, which I don't even know how you would go through your life living according to that. Because every moment, all right, you walked by a piece of trash and you should have picked it up, but you didn't see it. Now you're a douchebag. I mean, how granular are we going to get of right and wrong? So, if I were to walk to work and the right thing is to pick up trash, and that's what my dad taught me growing up. He's like, you never walk by a piece of trash and don't pick it up. I wouldn't make it to work.
You'd just be picking up
No, but I
trash.
wouldn't. And then it would be wrong to show up to work late, like, because I got patients waiting for me. You know, like, you're going to encounter these things. So anyway, if there was a right and wrong, and it was like somehow something you could remotely follow, I would still mess it up. And then I would be like a child, very confused, and following a list, probably not even in my body.
You would feel more obligated to do certain things if you were convinced.
No, I think it would literally just drive me crazy, because
Okay.
just like the example I gave you, I would somehow know.
Yeah.
If I could somehow know everything that was right, I don't think it's possible to do it in the realm, like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can you think of a good reason for someone to be convinced there is a right and wrong?
I think if it hurts you, it might hurt somebody else. And I think being inquisitive and just asking other people, like, if you're a staunch Republican, actually talk to people that completely disagree with your opinion, and vice versa.
I guess what I'm asking is,
Ask it again.
let's say, and I'm not saying that this is the case,
Mm-hmm.
but let's say that I was convinced there is a right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What would be one of my reasons?
I'm still trying to understand that question.
What would be a reason that I could give you
As to
that I could say, me being convinced that there is a right and wrong?
Mhm.
Can you think of a reason to be convinced there is a right and wrong?
I would love for someone to give me something convincing. I'm trying to think of something convincing.
You can use your imagination.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I mean, I think of like the general thing I think of is someone, you know, even I use the language of, you know, bad, like something bad happened. You know, car accident, you got paralyzed, or some violent crime, right? So on one level, on the level that we live, I just don't know that right and wrong is the right verbiage. I don't know that it's super helpful. But I would say, like, I think of it as like common human is someone suffering, right? I understand why we say right and wrong, good or bad. I use that verbiage all the time. So I'm not trying to necessarily completely break that paradigm.
Okay.
Like, I wouldn't say, okay, Hitler was, you know, doing this and just be passive about it. I totally get, like, I mean, I've gone to Afghanistan and, you know, and stuff. So and the suffering there, for example, like the women and children and the things that I saw, I want to do something about it. So I understand that. But if you never ask why it's there in the first place, you're never going to solve the problem. Oh, you can listen. If one group attacks another group and they're like, "We seek revenge. We cannot let that go." Okay, the other side's not going to let it go either. And here we have hundreds of years later, or a few thousand years later, and these two groups of people that are actually not inherently at a cellular level any different than each other. They just have different ideas they grew up with, are going to keep fighting and killing each other over and over and over. So when does right and wrong get us into more trouble?
Right.
Instead of actually, like, what do we want? Do we want not war? Well, then we can't be creating war in our own mind and heart. If we're creating, even if you have animosity towards a group of people, but you never do anything negative, you smile, you speak kindly, but in your heart, in your mind, you have animosity, you really believe you're better than them, that's still a problem. That will come out. That's still a problem.
So if I'm hearing correctly, this kind of goes back to what you were when you were first answering the question. If somebody believes there is a right and wrong, and that causes them to reduce harm or suffering, that would be a good reason for someone to believe that there's right and wrong?
I don't know. I keep stepping away from the right and wrong paradigm. I think it's fair if you see suffering to help people. I do. Like that's what I try to do every day, right? But I also think in this hyper-connected world, when you have a greater vision of like what's going on in other countries and injustices all around the world and even climate change and all the concerns we have, for a lot of people, this idea of right and wrong, it can get really ugly. It also can be very overwhelming. It's like, what are you supposed to do? You know, what change are you supposed to make? It's tricky because I think if we had an easy answer, we would be in a different place. We wouldn't have all the issues we have. So obviously there's no easy answer. But if you like the idea of having your own mind, I used to joke because this person that was like, maybe semi had done too many drugs, had one time said, and my friend and I joke, we say it all the time, we go, I got my own mind. We say that all the time, just joking around, I got my own mind. But really, do you have your own mind? And what sounds better to you? Like thinking for yourself, but also living with a curiosity that you're willing to not place yourself above or below anyone else, but understanding that they got their own mind too. We could solve a lot of problems. We're not going to not have problems. We're never going to not have problems. You could take any like little issue and you say, okay, we work together in a perfect world. We work together and we come up with what we think is going to be a solution. We test that solution. It will not be perfect. So how do we then continue to work together to make it as good as possible? And that's the best you're going to get on planet Earth in this realm. You know, I mean, if a galaxy collided with us and we just exploded, what are you going to do about it? You're going to be like, well, you wouldn't be here, but if you were here, if you were the only one left, you're going to be like, oh, that was so bad. Okay? Like, there's just some stuff you're not going to change. Like, you're not going to change. I don't know. I'm getting a little bit off topic there. But, like...
Anything else you want to say?
Oh, I could talk all day.
Really?
I could talk a long time.
I got my own mind. Love that.
Yeah, we do though. We do. And so I just think cultivate question your perceptions. Have fun with it. It's totally okay. You can have many different thoughts and not change your belief about something. Sometimes people are threatened by even thinking differently, or they don't want to use their imagination. Like when you were telling me, Sam, just use your imagination. How many times have you heard people say, I can't imagine, and then fill in the blank? Like, I can't imagine how that person would do that. Or I can't imagine what it must feel like to be homeless. Well, actually, you could imagine it if that's what imagination is for. So anyway, we got our own mind. And then understand other people have their own mind. And I think if we can just do that, it's not gonna be perfect. It's not gonna be perfect. But do we need to be a-holes all the time? To ourselves or other people? No. I don't know.
Well, cool. That was fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. What? Any feedback on the conversation?
No, it was good. Some of the questions I was like, oh, it's hard to answer because my paradigm is like, that's not the. And I know you're trying to like ask for someone who does have that paradigm, but it's also hard for me to like look at it from that paradigm. Yeah. I want to do a fist bump with that guy because I've talked to him several times.
It's really coming down. Do you have something in mind?
Thanks so much.
And you know what? Every idea I have is a second-hand idea. I don't know if I've had an original idea in my entire life.
It's really coming down.
It's interesting to think about.
Like every kind of, a lot of this is like spiritual concepts, and I've gravitated toward it. But I mean, I don't know what original idea have I had. So I don't take myself that seriously
Yeah.
for that reason.
Yeah, it's because it seems like every idea we have requires some other idea, right?
There's input. There's input. Yeah. Yeah. But it's fun.
Cool.